All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. Let me share my screen. What am I doing? If y'all can't tell, it's a weird Monday. We have 5 games on the slate. This week's going to be weird. There's like a ton of games tomorrow, a few games on Wednesday, and then no games. Well, one game on Thursday. It's a weird one. But we'll get there. We're making it through it. This is the pre-lock show for NBA where we're going to go game by game, and I'll also answer your questions, talk through the concerns you might have about this slate, and just make sure, we're all on the same page. We've had a lot of news break before this show even started, which really made this slate a bit more straightforward, which I like, but it also makes me a little bit nervous. There's definitely quite a few spots where I want to get different, and then I'm really just trusting the DS to force in some guys I want some exposure to make some good lines for me. For those of you who don't know, this is the DS Army's domination station. If you're interested in having access to this or the Discord, feel free to click the link in the description. Promo code BOB for 10% discount if you want to support me with that. If not, that's fine too. But let's get right into it. Cujo, good to see you. OG, you've been crushing it, man. Good to see you as well. I agree, Michael. Hope everyone had a blessed day. Bat Wheat, Harlock, Mega Royal, Don Juan, you're right. A lot of chalk. We'll get to it, though. Starting off, one thing I'll say when you look at this slate, looking at all 5 games, I always say it, I'm looking to target these higher total games. It sounds obvious, but more often than not, these games are lower owned than they should be. Definitely not the Rockets, but some of these teams you'll see. So we'll start off with the Cleveland Cavs. This is a bit of a weird spot because they're in a paced up spot. The Bulls have been playing at a pretty quick pace, and even they've been playing at a slightly higher pace as well. So this is a pretty good game environment for the Cavs. They're still undefeated. What makes the Cavs a little bit harder on a slate like this is that they don't really have anyone who's out at this point. I mean, Max Strus has been out for a while, but that doesn't really matter for us anymore. But from like a DFS standpoint, there's no real injury news that gets things moving. And so we're just looking at a healthy Cavs team when we have other teams on the slate that have injuries and guys out, and that just increases usage rates for other players, and that makes them much more viable plays. But anyway, like I said, highest total game on the slate. I want exposure to these guys. There's a ton of chalk that we'll get to with relatively cheap guys that I'm going to have a crap ton of, more than I even feel comfortable having. But I still want to make sure I'm forcing exposure to the guys who are still in good spots. That list includes Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Jared Allen. They've all had pretty solid usage rates this season, all in paced up spots. I don't have a favorite. Usually I would just pick on Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland or someone like that. But really, they're all in good spots. The Bulls are not a team I'm worried about from a defensive standpoint, really at any position. And so because of that, I just want to make sure I forced exposure to these 4. And you can see the exposure men I put on these guys. So they're showing up exactly at that amount. I have a little bit more Evan Mobley where I'm over the field on him. Darius Garland, I'm slightly over the field. And then I still have exposure to Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell because I forced exposure, but I'm slightly under the field on them. That wasn't really for any particular reason. I just wanted to make sure they showed up in my lines because I do think 1 to 2 of these guys go off tonight. What's good, JM? Darius, I appreciate you, man. Michael, if you need help figuring out the domination station, let me know what questions you have. For me, I'm sure so many of y'all are so tired of me saying this, but the settings aren't really too complicated. For every other DFS sport, there's a lot of rules. There's a ton of settings. There's different stacks we need. But for DFS, for NBA DFS, it's pretty straight to the point. I just use tournament mode. I don't really change anything else. Just tournament mode, and everything else I just keep the same. I know B-Dubs, he likes to use the like, love, and adore button a bit more instead of putting men's on players. Again, we've seen both approaches work. For me, I force men's on guys. Other people like to put a like on them. So Nothing too crazy. Let's see here. Moving on. Like I said, I'm just forcing exposure to the Cavs because it's a high total game, the highest total game. Next up, we have the Bulls. You all know I don't like picking on the Cavs very often. They're a pretty good defense, but they've been playing at a faster pace, so they haven't been quite as scary as they have been historically. And so I'm just making sure I'm forcing exposure to the Bulls, and I want to be over the field on Vucevic. Vucevic, I just like because he has the highest usage rate on this Bulls team. The matchup against the Cavs is tough. Allen and Mobley are Twin Towers scenario where they are a tough defense to pick on. And with Vucevic, we've seen him have a lot of pretty subpar performances against this Cavs team. If you look at last season, we saw quite a few like 37, 38 fantasy points, but he did have some 50-point games, or at least like 48 to 50-point games. I remember seeing that in like the March matchup that they had. It was either February or March matchup against the Cavs. So we know the upside is there. And on a 5-game slate, highest total slate or highest total game on the slate, I want to force exposure to guys who have 50-plus point upside. You need that raw points. And so therefore, I'm going to make sure I have exposure to Vucevic. So you see I have an 8% min on him. Just to make sure he's showing up in my lines and I'm over the field there. Zach LaVine, I couldn't get over the field on him, but at 6,800, he feels a little cheap for me. When we look at the guys who are out for Chicago, Lonzo's been out for a while. Jalen Smith is still questionable, unless I missed the news on that, but I don't think I did. Let me double check right quick. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything from Jalen Smith yet. So yeah, he's still questionable. Damn, Malik Monk to miss at least 2 weeks. Brutal. But yeah, Zach LaVine, I just want to make sure he was showing up in my lines because he wasn't showing up too much earlier at his price tag. I don't hate it. Matchup is brutal. If it was like an 8 to 10 game slate, I wouldn't even look at this team. But because it's a 5-gamer and because it's the highest total, that's why I'm forcing exposure to these guys, Vucevic and LaVine. Let's see. No other Bulls are showing up for me outside of those two guys that I forced exposure to. LaVine's showing up a little bit more for me, around 13%, which is closer to field weight, which I'm a bit more comfortable with, to be honest. All right. Next up, we have the Kings going up against the Spurs. This Kings game is more interesting because Malik Monk is out. Malik Monk, if you don't really follow basketball that closely, probably doesn't feel like the biggest deal in the world. But he plays a good amount of minutes. And because Malik Monk is out, that makes guys like Kevin Huerter and Keon Ellis much more viable on this slate. Typically, Huerter is not someone that I trust when it comes to DFS. I mean, hell, even now, I don't really trust him when it comes to DFS. Same thing with Keon Ellis. They're both pretty low usage rate guys. I don't expect them to come in and play that Malik Monk role and have a ton of upside. But one thing that made me a little bit more interested in these two players is that the Kings did play last night. They're on the back end of a back-to-back. Sabonis and Fox both played pretty hefty minutes. And so I was looking at Fox and Sabonis as potential leverage plays for me on this slate, but coming off the back end of a back-to-back, which I typically don't look at too much, just made me a little bit more nervous about their true upside at these price tags, where we're paying a bit of a premium for them on this slate. And so that's part of why Kevin Huerter is someone that I'm forcing exposure to. I'm going to be over the field. He's a value play I like a lot on this slate. And then Keon Ellis, 10% ownership. 3% ownership. I want to be significantly over the field on him. He's someone else I want to force exposure to in a spot where I expect him to see more minutes. And ideally, that usage rate goes up. That's a big if and hope. But that kind of ownership, not much to worry about. What happened to Allen last game? Bless 16. Honestly, I'm not sure. The Cavs have a lot of really good players, and sometimes those guys don't come through. I didn't play DFS over the last 2, 3, 4 days. I don't play Sunday, Saturday, Friday. So I didn't pay too much attention, but I did watch the game. But I think he, just got. They can't all have big games every night, unfortunately. Really good team though. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Kings for me. It's Herter, and then I have Ellis, and then Keegan Murray is another very, very viable option on this slate. I'm under the field on him at 5%. He's looking like he's supposed to be 15% owned. DeMar DeRozan's looking pretty chalky at 18%. Fox, Sabonis. I'm just not getting there, unfortunately, for the reasons I already mentioned, but we'll see. Oh, that's painful, man. That's painful. Was Allen not needed? I don't know. I didn't watch the game, so I didn't look at the matchups as much. Josiah Zaire Smith going to start for DFS. We'll get there. Mr. DFS himself. So sad. We were talking about it, and then that's when he got hurt. That was brutal. All right. So yeah, Kings not that exciting for me just because of the back-to-back element on a 5-gamer. Let's see here. Next up, we have the Spurs. Do we have any interesting injury news? Nothing new. All of it's relatively old. Malachi Branham's questionable, but that doesn't really mean too much for me. The Spurs team, hard to get excited about them, especially with Vassell coming back. I can't really get on board with the Castle train anymore. Barnes was never someone we loved, but was viable for a little bit there. They just have a solid rotation going. Any of these guys can get hot, but they didn't stand out for me. Victor Wembanyama, I've been seeing a lot of people talking trash about him here lately, especially his lack of offensive ability. But we know that upside is still there, and so 12% ownership. I want to be over the field to really, in my opinion. Let me make sure I'm not saying anything wild. Okay, one of 2 studs on this slate, and he's the one that's not super chalky. And so I just wanted to force exposure to him, and he's not in a tough matchup like Harden is. So Victor was someone I did force in the lines to make sure he showed up, and he's really the only Spur. Let's see, any others? We see Victor right here. No one else is really popping for me, and that's me just trusting the DS here. I'm totally fine with that. Don Juan said, fading Webby. Too soft. Too soft. Not for me, though, man. Not for me. All right, next up, we have the Wizards going up against the Rockets. Let's see, when it comes to injury news for the Wizards, we have Carlton Carrington listed as questionable. This is pretty big news. Let me make sure we haven't gotten this update yet. Carrington. Yep, we haven't gotten anything yet. If Carrington gets ruled out, you see like he's a player who sees 30-plus minutes. It really would balance out the value a good bit. It would mean we can go back to guys like Bilal Coulibaly. I think he would really be the main guy I would be excited to play. It would make some of these grosser cheapies in like the 56, 5,400 range, maybe even Davis slightly more viable, but yeah, that would get a little gross. But right now, I'm not overly excited about playing the Wizards tonight. This is the second highest total game on the slate. Pretty widespread, though, so there is some blowout concern. I am forcing exposure to Poole and Kuzma just in case this game stays close. Kyle Kuzma coming back from an injury. Rarely will you see me get overly excited about a guy like that. But again, 5-game slate, not a lot of high totals. This is a game environment I do want some exposure to, so that's why you see a min on Kyle Kuzma, and I'm forcing exposure to Poole, even though he was a much better play before Kuzma was rolled in. Carlton Carrington, he's really the guy that's making me feel a little bit more nervous about this team. It would be pretty easy to just move on if we had that news. But thankfully, all the games start at 8. So we'll get that news in time for the slate, and then we'll make some changes from there. Again, we'll be in the Discord to help out with that. But I will force exposure, or honestly, the DS will probably naturally force some of these guys in the lineups if he gets ruled out. All right. Next up, we have the Rockets, the Houston Rockets going up against the Wizards. The Wizards are still a bad defense. There's that. But probably what's the most important thing and why you're seeing the Rockets show up in every single line you have is because Amon Thompson is out. Or not Amon Thompson, sorry. Fred VanVleet is out. And because Fred VanVleet is out, we're seeing huge increases in minutes for guys like Amon Thompson. See, he was top of mind. That's why that happened. Even guys like, and usage rates increase everywhere for everyone. Şengün was already in a really good spot, going up against a bad Wizards defense and front court. Jabari Smith sees an increase in usage. Terry Eason should be more involved and sees an increase in minutes with Fred VanVleet out. Even guys like Reed Shepherd are starting to show up a little bit. Reed Shepherd isn't someone that I ever feel, safe with or I'm overly excited to play. But because he's only 3,100 and we have him projected to see 22 minutes tonight, he becomes a much more viable DFS play at dirt minimum. You'll also see some guys talking about Aaron Holiday. Aaron Holiday is also a slightly more viable DFS play at 3K because we're expecting him to see 20 minutes. The issue with Aaron Holiday is really just his lack of usage, and he typically isn't very involved in the offense. My favorite play from this team is Jalen Green. He's going under-owned. People aren't talking about him. He also has a fantastic matchup against this really bad Wizards defense. And we know the upside Jalen Green has, especially with Fred VanVleet not playing and missing every three he shoots. So I really expect Jalen Green to take over this game. And it wouldn't shock me if we see Green and Poole have a little bit of back-to-back like we've seen a few times already this season with Poole involved. Jose said, will Champagny start? Let me look at some predicted starting lineups for y'all. My gut instinct was to say yes. Yeah, it looks like he should start here. And then, was there anything else? Yeah, but I mean, honestly, yeah, Champagny should start. But when we look at the price tag for the Spurs, like he's 5K. Like we're not really getting a discount. If he was 4,300 or cheaper, then I'll be a bit more excited about it. And we know this team with their rotations, even if a guy starts, they usually still don't see 30 plus, unfortunately. All right. For the Rockets, we already talked about them a lot. Şengün is the chalk of the slate. You did see I put a 90% cap on him just because I wanted a mixture. I wanted to have some lines where he wasn't showing up in every single one. Instead, now Amon Thompson is showing up in every single line. Amon at 4,900 with a higher usage rate without Fred VanVleet is not something I'm scared of. We saw it earlier last season where he is a player that can lead and dominate with a high usage rate. So I'm not overly concerned about Amon in a pretty good matchup. Şengün at 7,900 in this spot, again, makes sense to me. I don't feel like that's bad chalk. Terry Eason always worries me a little bit, but at 4,800 in this spot, he's going to be a player who shows up a lot for me. Reed Shepherd, I'm going to be over the field on. We talked about him. He's cheap, but he has a higher usage rate than Holiday, so I'll survive with a 3,100 player. We're not really asking him to do too much. If he gets us 18, 16 points, that's good enough. Ideally, we see closer to like 20, 23. That's GPP winning upside, but we'll see. Jalen Green's kind of like my sneaky play here. And then Dylan Brooks for those of you that don't know, I really don't like Dylan Brooks. I have a bias here. It's well documented. He is looking relatively chalky, but that's not chalk I'm trying to chase. He's useless 95% of the time. He is showing up in 2% of my lines, and that's almost 2% too many, but I'll allow it if that's what the DS wants. If Steven Adams gets ruled out, let's see, is he still questionable? Yeah, he's still questionable. If he gets ruled out, Şengün really could just be a lock because there's no one else there really who will impact those minutes because they won't really have very many other options. Let's see. Yeah, the ownership is scary, but Amon's great. Look, B-Dub's my guy. Good to see you, man. He's even saying Amon's a lock tonight. Yeah, Amon's in 97% of my lines, and it's just the way it's going. Yeah, Kuzma, I mean, like I said, man, just a high total game. They're not seeing ownership. I'm just going to force a little bit. Not 10, 15, but 5% is nice. Favorite Cavalier considering price. Okay, I just said I have a 20% min on all of them. I do not have a favorite. But gun to head, if you really want me to pick one, it's pretty much always Donovan Mitchell for me. But I don't hate the price tag on Allen either. So between those two, but I don't really have a favorite. I just knew I wanted exposure to all of them. I also don't like Brooks. Yeah. Honestly, if you like Brooks, that's more of a red flag than anything. Anything. Jose said, is Zaire Williams going to even play? Because I can't find him on DraftKings anywhere. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. Jose, I haven't even thought about Zaire Williams in a long time. So yeah, when we get to the Nets, we are there. We have him playing 22 minutes. Let me look up the injury news for the Nets and see if we can find a reason to think about him for a little bit longer. Brooklyn Nets. We have Dorian Finney-Smith listed as questionable. That is always a concern. Do we get the news on DFS yet? Dorian. Yes, we got that a little bit ago. He is out. And so with Dorian Finney-Smith out, let's see. Who sees a nice boost here? That's a nice boost to Wilson. And these projections have already been updated with the DFS news out, which is nice. And you can already tell because Zaire Williams wouldn't have a 4.7 fantasy points per dollar rating unless someone else was out. And so that does make him slightly more fantasy viable, but I think we have better value on the slate. But we'll take a look and see if he's showing up for me at all. He's just a low usage player, someone that I really don't get overly excited about typically. So yeah, I think that's a boost to him. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Clowney sees a few more minutes in the rotation. Slight boost to Cameron Johnson, a few guys who are going to miss threes a little bit less. But end of story for me is I just don't like picking on the Pelicans. I know we have Zion out, CJ out, Jonte Murray out, Herb Johnson's out, or Herbert Jones is out, Jordan Hawkins is out for the Pelicans. But when it comes to the Pelicans, they're just coached well. They typically play at a pretty slow pace. That's why they have the lowest total on the slate. The Nets can get hot, like guys like Cam Thomas, Dennis Schroeder, Cam Johnson. They're all pretty streaky, but they're priced appropriately. So they just didn't stand out for me on this slate, unfortunately. Claxton looks like he might start to show up a little bit more for us. He's looking pretty chalky too. So I'll look and see if he's showing up for me at all. But ultimately, I'm not looking at these guys. Starting lineup, we don't have an official starting lineup, but I think the expectation around the industry is for Jalen Wilson to start here at 3,800, still seeing around like 22 minutes. Low usage rate player. Doesn't really get me super excited, but you could do worse. But the thing is, like, the value on the Rockets is so good, it's hard for me to get excited about some of the other value. Nick Claxton is showing up in about 25% of my lines naturally. I didn't force that. That's the DS doing its own thing. Again, not my favorite play in the world, but Pelicans going up against Missy. Their front court's a little bit weaker about Zion and crew. I'll live with it, but I'm not happy about it. And then Ben Simmons is showing up in 1% of my lines, but that's about it. Just not excited about the Nets. Again, low total games are never a situation I'm trying to find reasons to play. Like, I'm not trying to find reasons to play these guys. Oh, see, I've talked about it before, Darius. I totally understand the hate with Gary Trent Jr. I just can't hate him. I just can't hate him. Levine, yeah, I like Levine. I put a 10% min on him, and he was showing up in about 16% of my lines. But I don't. I think that's getting a little cute, to be honest. I just like it because it's a high total game, but the matchup's still pretty tough. Yeah, Jose B-Dub's got you. He is on DraftKings. He's a shooting guard. He's 3,700. He's just really cheap. But again, I think there's still better value. Michael said, do you feel like Şengün, Eason, Green, and Thompson in the same lineup is too much? Not on a 5-gamer. No, it's a lot, but let me double check. I have a lot of it too. So yeah, I have Thompson, Eason, Green, Şengün. Yeah, that's literally my top line. I have quite a few 3 to 4, 3 lines with the Rockets. They're my favorite value on the slate and just favorite plays on the slate. So they actually have a real stud out. Some of the other teams have players out. Okay, let me calm down. Fred VanVleet's not a stud, but they have like an actual starting NBA player of a high usage rate out. That's really what I'm shooting for here. Mega Royal, I don't love Claxton against the Pelicans, but just because they have a weaker front court right now, the DS likes him, so I'm 5% over the field, so I'm fine with it. Jay, is the revenge narrative real for SGA playing his old ass team? I don't think so. I do like SGA tonight, though. I do like him, but I don't think there's not a revenge narrative. It's a thank you. It's a thank you for letting me be free and have success. All right. For the Pelicans, this is another team that has a ton of guys out. We just went through them, but for those of you who weren't listening, I'll go through them one more time. We have Zion out, CJ out, DeJounte Murray still out, Herb Jones out, Jordan Hawkins out. Yeah, it's tough. That's part of why Brandon Boston Jr. is 5,900, which makes it pretty easy for us to not feel like we have to force exposure to him. Jose Alvarado, usage rate continues to go up, which is what you want to see, but it's also not a surprise when guys like Murray, CJ, and Zion aren't playing. And Brandon Ingram has the highest usage rate on this team, to the surprise of nobody. But that usage rate is what keeps him viable in DFS. I keep saying it. There's only a few guys on this slate who have a relatively good chance of having 50-plus point upside. Brandon Ingram is one of those guys, and so he's someone I want to force exposure to. So I have a 25% minimum on him, not forcing myself to go over the field, but I know on a 5-game slate, I need to have exposure to these guys so I have a chance of winning. Other Pelicans, Jose Alvarado is showing up in a ton of lines. I did put a cap on Jose Alvarado. He's in a great spot, decent, solid matchup. Again, my biggest concern here is just the low total. And I do think there are cheaper guards on the slate who are just as viable as Jose Alvarado. And so he's in a great spot, great play. I'm significantly over the field, but I did just put an 80% cap on him just so he wasn't in every single line of mine. And then we talked about Brandon Ingram. I forced exposure to him, and that's pretty much it. Again, this is just not a team you're trying to force too much exposure to because of the low total. You can take 1 or 2 shots on these guys, but that's about it. All right, next up we have another game that's not my favorite. This Clippers game going up against the Thunder. Not too many interesting pieces at this point. For the Clippers, at least. The Clippers are no real new. Injury news is the important piece. And so going up against a Thunder team that's been pretty good from a defensive standpoint makes it a little tough for me to get excited about a James Harden or Norman Powell or Kevin Porter Jr. Like, all these guys have been playing better, but the matchup's still brutal. Now, it's hard because the rotation is going to be different with the Thunder, and seeing a guy like Chet leave the starting lineup, who is a defensive force, should, in theory, make the Thunder struggle a bit more defensively. And so the main thing that stood out to me was Zubac in this new matchup that's significantly softer than it looks on paper at only 6% ownership. Again, with these low total games, I'm not trying to force exposure to too many guys. I just like to pick 1 or 2. And my one guy here is Zubac, and I'm putting a 15% min on him. If I didn't like all the Cavs and just forced exposure to them, I would consider taking a shot on James Harden here, but it just didn't feel worthwhile for me. The spread, 6.5, isn't bad. You can make a case for Harden. I just like other guards significantly more on the slate from like a value standpoint. So Zubac is the main key here. Powell's been great. I get it, but he didn't stand out for me too much. And when we look at my exposures, the only guy who's really showing up is Zubac for me. And a little bit of KPJ, but I don't like it. But I'm still not going to X him out. So it's Zubac and moving on. And then for the Thunder. Wait, what are y'all saying? What are y'all saying? Let's see. JM said, is 3 Rockets too much? No, exactly. Octavius, you're right, man. Not on a 5-gamer. 3 Rockets isn't too much. What exactly, Darius? Get out of my head, man. Get out of my head. The worst thing about Zubac is the price tag, but thankfully we have a ton of value because of the Rockets game. The Rockets, we have Amin at 4,900, a freaking steal. Terry Eason, 4,800. I'm not gonna tout up Reed Shepherd too much, but very cheap player with decent upside. But really, it's Eason and Amin who you should feel really good about. They're very solid value plays. Eason always scares the hell out of me, but Amin, I love on this slate. And so that's what gives us the ability to pay up for a guy like Zubac, who does have a lot of upside in this spot. And again, I only have 15% Zubac, so I'm significantly over the field on Zubac, and I don't have to do too much to get there, which is beautiful. Okay, let's stop talking about the Clippers. Next up, we have the Thunder. This is another team that gets interesting because they have actual injury news. We have Chet out, which is a huge blow to this team. He does a little bit of everything on offense and defense for these guys. With him out, obviously SGA sees a huge increase in usage. He's someone who's showing up in the vast majority of people's lines. He's going to be chalky on this slate, but for good reason. I want plenty of exposure to him. Jalen Williams sees an increase in usage. He should show up naturally in your lines. Lou Dort, your typical 3-and-D player, does get a bit more involved. He sees an increase in usage when Chet is ruled out. And so for that reason alone, and because it's a 5-game slate, it's rare you will catch me playing Lou Dort on a slate with a lot of games. But on a slate like this, I'm significantly more willing to play Lou Dort only because of the usage increase. And he's a good defensive player. And honestly, Lou Dort is right now my highest owned Thunder player, which I'm fine with. I'm not really overly concerned about that. Jalen Williams is showing up a lot. I did absolutely nothing to force that. SGA showing up in about 30% of my lines. I'm over the field on him. These are the 3 Thunder I feel the best about and I want to have exposure to. Aaron Wiggins, we'll go a little bit lower. So Aaron Wiggins is someone that the sim model liked a good bit. Under the circumstances, the rotations are probably going to get weird. We saw yesterday Isaiah Joe start to see a bit more of an increased role with Chet rolled out. The Thunder might decide to play small. Trying to get into this coach's head is really like trying to drive yourself insane. We've seen him do wild things for a long time with the starting lineup. Players will start the first quarter. They will not be starting at halftime. And so I try to not get overly attached to some of these options. Just because we don't know what these rotations are going to look like until we see a couple of games. And so that's why I'm taking a shot on a guy like Aaron Wiggins, who doesn't have the highest usage rate, but makes sense with the sim and with the injury news that they have and the potential increase in minutes. Isaiah Joe is showing up naturally around field weight for me. That's exactly where I want him to be. He does have plenty of upside, but I just don't want too much of a guy that can totally just ruin your night. And then Cason Wallace is showing up in one line. That's about it. Caruso is someone I wanted to like a bit more on this slate. Primarily just because he could help them a lot on the defensive end. But even in their last game when Chet got hurt, he didn't see too much run. Probably just because of his height. And so I just don't expect him to see too much additional run here in this spot either, unfortunately. Whereas, yeah, it's just hard to like some of these cheapies. The only one that really did stand out for me was Aaron Wiggins. But even that, I'm starting to get a little bit more nervous about. Like I said, the core Thunder guys you want to feel good about are Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, and SGA. Those are your guys. Outside of that, it gets a little gross pretty fast. They're viable just because of the size of the slate, but you can't feel safe with those cheapies down here. They get weird. And so, yeah, guys, that's the 5-game slate. Nothing too crazy. Pretty straight to the point. Don Juan, I know the price tag was crazy. What is your core 4? I always do 5, but for me, it's Amin Thompson, Alperen Şengün, Jose Alvarado, Terry Eason, and Lou Dort. And then I don't really like it when my cores aren't above like 60 or 70%. And so I'll put a 60% min on Lou Dort to boost him a little bit. Donovan said, don't expect Caruso until the second half of the season to get going. It wouldn't shock me. Wow, appreciate you, man. Yeah, I like Donovan Mitchell, but this is not a fun take. I don't like to be the guy that says play everybody, but all of the Cavs just kind of stood out to me pretty evenly. And so I just forced exposure to all of the starters minus LeVert Okoro. But I like Allen, I like Garland, I like Mobley, I like Mitchell. But just because they're all healthy, it was hard for me to have them show up significantly more than some of the other value options we have on the slate, or guys like SGA who see an increasing usage, or Brandon Ingram who see an increasing usage because of injuries. So I just had to add them into my mix. I couldn't really take a stand there, which is honestly something I think people overvalue. I know it's great for you single entry guys who love to take stands, but if you're MMEing, it's good to just kind of massage it. Increase guys you want to see exposure to, lower guys you don't want to see as much exposure to. That's really the way you see most people take down these GPPs, and how I've usually done it too. All right, and so yeah, that's pretty much it for me on this slate. Unless you all have any more questions, I'll give you a little bit more time. But yeah, it's one of those slates that feel pretty straight to the point. The biggest thing for me that I'm just waiting on is this Carrington news, and depending on that Carrington news, it will make me force a little bit more exposure to Poole, a little bit more to Kuzma, but the guy who will see a significant increase in exposure to me would be like Coulibaly, maybe even guys like, no, I doubt I'll see too much George and Kispert given the other value we have on this slate, but I might force a few percentages just because they have a slightly higher increase in usage. Thoughts on Cam Thomas tonight? I didn't get there, Rodney. I mean, Cam Thomas, he shoots for days. I don't love the matchup, but granted, half of this team is gone at this point. But Jose Alvarado is still a really good defender. But yeah, I didn't get there at 7,200. We're just not getting a discount, and it's the lowest game total on the slate. And I already have Claxton showing up in my lines and even a little bit of Ben Simmons. So I couldn't get too excited about it. He's not a bad play. I just didn't get there. Why do you like Dort in single entry, and why? I might be missing the second half of your question there, JM, but Dort, for me, he's just fine in single entry. I think he's viable just because of his price tag and the increasing usage he sees with Chet out, and it solidifies his role on this team even more. I think, especially in a matchup, as long as he stays out of foul trouble, that's one thing I worry about him with a little bit, but 4,100 is just too cheap. I really like Lou Dort, even in single entry. Darius said Dort, Ingram, SGA, or I really like that, or Green, Mobley, Zubac. Ooh, that's tough. I always hate when people give this answer, but it's true more often than not. The safer play is the first one. They all have a higher floor. Ingram, SGA, Dort. And then Green, Mobley, Zubac is like my GPP play, and something I'm probably going to put in like a 3 max or single entry lines. And for me, when I play single entry, I don't really play it very safely. I just toss in the line that has some of my favorite leverage plays and use that. B-Dubs likes Dort and his. So B-Dubs is a single entry GOAT. And so you take that for what it is. JM said, any Wizards love to run it back with my 3 Rockets? You don't really have to force like a run back in NBA basketball. And it feels even better today since all the games are starting at the same time. But I am forcing exposure to Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma. But I don't love it. I don't think you need to do it on this slate. If Carrington gets ruled out, it becomes a much different story. I think Coulibaly is like a really easy, viable option just from a usage rate increase. But there's not really anyone who stands out for me too much that I would force in there. All right, y'all. So that's pretty much everything. I will try to be back tomorrow. It's an in-office day, and so it's also a really big slate, so it's a bit more 50-50 if I make it for the show tomorrow. But if not, I'll be back Wednesday. We'll be good to go. And then there's only one game on Thursday, so I doubt we'll do a show then. But we'll see. Guap said, do you think SGA and Wemby can be in the winning lineup? Let me see. One feature I like is I can click this magnifying glass and just see if SGA is only showing up in one lineup of mine with Victor. Let's take a look and see what it looks like and see if I like it or not. I feel like it probably has some wild names. Let's see, SGA and Victor. Has Brandon Ingram, Amon, Terry Eason, Wiggins. Okay, I'm not trying to give y'all a line to use, but low-key, I kind of like that. Not going to lie. Man, I like that line. There's some scary names in there, like Shepard is just as likely to disappoint me than he is to help me come through, but the DS likes him, so I'm just going to leave him in there. But yeah, it'll be a good one. All right, peace out, y'all. Thank you for sticking out with me on a Monday. I know it's a NFL slate, so views are always a little bit lower. So if y'all want to like the show, help people remember that we're still going, that would be awesome. Levert or Castle? Ooh. Reynolds, man, that you are in a gross range for me. Let me look, though. Let's see. Levert and Castle. Those are just not two guys. Castle. Yeah. Not two guys I'm overly excited about. Castle, I told you. Who is it? Is it Pacell who's kind of been eating into his minutes? He's been playing a bit less. And then I think there's someone else who's been behind him too, sneaking into his minutes too, just kind of lowering some of that upside. But not crazy. Cavs. Levert. Castle. I mean, I would go Levert, but I don't have exposure to either one, to be honest. All right, you're right, man. Good luck. Peace out, y'all. See y'all soon. Bye.
Big time. No, diamonds in my teeth. I got a lot of shine.